Good afternoon, LinkedIn. Welcome to another edition of Elements of Interest with Josh Burkhalter. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really good today, Chris. A lot going on. It'll lead into this talk that we're having, but um, yeah, a lot of things happening at work. A lot of things happening at home. Just finished helping my son move into a new place. I'm moving myself soon. I've told a few people about this. You're one of them, but I don't think I've said this publicly because I tried this about a year and a half ago and I had to cut it short. But yeah, after ASTM DO2 conference in December, I'll be flying out to do a 3 week vacation in Southeast Asia, and then I'll immediately come back and start a U.S. road trip that I've been looking forward to for a few years now. So
Awesome.
we'll still create content. Maybe I'll do some personal content as well along the way.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah,
you
just
got
kind
the
of
new
play.
YouTube channel
Yeah, yeah,
starting to play. I like it.
yeah. Um, yeah, so I'll visit some customers and prospects along the way, and then I'll do. I've got some goals, right? I want to see 50 waterfalls.
Okay.
I want to be an outdoorsy guy. The number 50 is kind of cool. Just coincidentally, I just realized like I've lost 50 pounds since May.
Hey, congrats, man. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. This month I'm on a streak. I've been in the gym every day. Excuse me, between the gym and I've been doing like either long walks or I've been rucking with a 25-pound pack. That's been fun.
Okay.
So I've done that
Yeah,
every day this month, sometimes twice a day.
there you go.
Yeah, so we're doing some stuff.
That's good. That's good. Man, I kind of just want to talk about that stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
we certainly
but
can. We do a double
But
header
no,
sometime.
yeah, yeah. We got another event coming up, and what we try to do on this show is to help people, share knowledge. We share knowledge. We try to help other people share knowledge and learn some stuff at the same time. We had a great event at Gulf Coast conference last month, a month ago now. That's crazy to think about. But now, like, this is that season where you get a month off and then it's ASTM time. Um, and figured, hey, like, let's talk about what, uh, usually can happen there, what can happen outside of ASTM to get involved. It doesn't have to be just the people that go, deciding all the rules for everybody else. Actually works better when that's not the case. So, yeah, what's on your mind? What are you expecting to see at ASTM this year?
Mm. Yeah, so yeah, we cover this from a few different angles, I suppose. Maybe we'll spend a moment at some point in this call. We'll talk about, you know, if you've never been, like, what is it, right? Like, let's make some sense of even what is it? What's the purpose? Maybe a little insight into how things operate. Um, at least speaking from my own perspective, when I first began, just like we talked about with GCC, what to expect, right? I don't want to just go in cold and have a conversation and look stupid or whatever else, right? But it really is a forum and an opportunity for everyone to have a voice. Now, some could say that maybe there are stronger voices in the room, but everyone's vote is equal. We could talk a little bit about that too. Yeah. So, but what am I looking forward to? The same thing I said about GCC. I said it in a post immediately after GCC. I'm not an extrovert. I do not necessarily enjoy crowds of people. Always having my game face on, having to be, thinking and doing and smiling and performing. So what I enjoy the most is, yeah, getting to catch up with people that I care about, that I've built relationships with, that I'm trying to serve. And then one of the things I'm gonna look forward to is I'm gonna Monday morning I'm gonna host a breakfast and a short 30-minute walk near the hotel, which is going to be near downtown Disney in Anaheim. So
Awesome.
yeah, I've got a post about that on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to comment with a If you need more details, most of them are there. But yeah, we'll get together, have a nice breakfast, talk about anything other than work, perhaps. Um, I gave a little teaser. You know, do a little bit of investing these days. I'm kind of all in on Bitcoin. So one of my attempts at engagement was to offer $100 of free Bitcoin for whoever guesses the price of Bitcoin the closest the day
There you go.
of the walk. So my guess was $77,420, and I was way off because we're at 90 or so right now. So which is
Hey,
certainly a good thing.
anything can happen. Uh, but yeah, no, that sounds like a fun time, and that kind of answers one of the questions: is there anything different going on than I remember? This is where like I've been able to get back to Gulf Coast a
Mm.
couple times, but it's been a while since I've gone to ASTM. Um, but let's start where you suggested it. Like, what is ASTM?
Sure. So let's make an assumption that everyone listening understands what ASTM standards are. Um, you know, ASTM is a consensus-based organization where people that are interested in the specifications and the work process and the standards that are followed in order to produce a test result. It's where, you know, producers, so like the refineries, for example, the consumers, the engine manufacturers, the general public, the regulators, everyone gets in a room based on kind of a common interest, right? It might be gasoline testing, it might be terminology, which we've joked about before. But they've got a set agenda. It's published months in advance. You show up to the room that makes sense for you to be in, and you have an opportunity to vote on things that are happening. You have an opportunity to, well, let's maybe start, let's back up a little bit, right? So standards are published. They're published with a year version number, and there's a requirement that every 5 years they be reapproved. They either have to be modified, reapproved, or they're withdrawn. So very often within 5 years, there's at least some type of editorial change, or there's some more significant change. There's a change to procedure, there's an expansion of the scope. So throughout the year, there's ballot items that are put forward, suggested changes. Those are sometimes debated and discussed in committee meetings. They're put forward to a ballot, so you know all members of ASTM have an opportunity um, to sign up to be a voter. Um, you know, there's some rules about, you know, you can't stack the votes, right? So you can't have 100 people from one organization voting. So there's kind of a designated voter. But you get all of these ballot items in an ASTM portal, and you can review the items. You can see the suggestion, you can see the comments and the history, and then you can vote for or against, or you can abstain. Um, and so really the whole, like, kind of high level, right? The whole purpose is that all interested parties, again, the people making the products, the people that are consuming the products, that are impacted by the products, other interested parties, are trying to work together to arrive at a consensus about what that standard work guide, work practice, or test method should be in order to serve the public, right? To ensure that the products are meeting specifications that mean that they're fit for use for whatever their intended purpose are. We talked a little bit about that a few weeks ago. Um, and yeah, that there's test methods that adequately test in a standardized, robust manner so that you can achieve those test results. So again, so that the public can trust that the products they're buying, whether that's a Sharpie marker or a gallon of gasoline, that it's going to meet the consumer's needs. Okay, so yeah, I kind of think like you could spend 2 hours tutorial, right? So maybe a couple quick things. If you were to ever attend an ASTM meeting, right, 7 a.m. Monday morning, there's orientation, right? You can be a new member or you could be there for 20 years. you can show up and you'll understand kind of the flow and the procedure of things. There's Q&A sessions throughout. There's ASTM members that are at a help desk that you can go and chat with. You can learn the process. And then you can find mentors and guides like we talked about with GCC. Find someone you know. Find someone you don't know. Just ask a question, right? Very often people are looking to help others. I think ASTM is just another really good example of that, where the industry like really does want to bring people along. I think by and large, people really enjoy when new professionals, people that are new to the industry or have changed roles, now they're more interested in participating in the process. Um, yeah, they enjoy helping folks, right? So I would, again, always just encourage, if you can make it, make it. If you make it, make the use out of your time, partner up with some people. Okay, but if you can't make it, right, you can still participate. There's like the official way, right, and there's the unofficial way, right? So the official way is that, you register for that committee and subcommittee, right? You get all of the ballot items. You can interact with that through the portal, vote for, against, make comment. And then there's the unofficial way, which is why we even started to think about talking about this topic, right? So let me back up a little bit further. Um, so heading into GCC, there was a post that someone in the industry made challenging parts of ASTM 6299 for SQC. So this person made a really good set of arguments for some of the challenges that laboratories have around some of the rules that you have to follow for 6299. It happened to be the 9 in a row run rule. So the person made a case for why that was a challenge and that sort of thing. Again, really great arguments, and it spurred some discussion, right? It spurred some critical feedback on LinkedIn. It it turned into some really nice conversations in the hallways at GCC among many people. Okay, so I'm getting to the point right here with the unofficial part. It also included a discussion with the person who's believed to be essentially the author of 6299, who's now the subcommittee chair for quality and statistics. So it was at a Gulf Coast conference challenging a standard that this person essentially has been involved with for 20 years, teaches a class about. And we had a wonderful discussion about, that kind of made people say, maybe I should think about this. Point is right, like the unofficial way is to have conversations with people that are in the same boat as you. For lack of a better term, maybe building a little bit of a coalition. um, and really,
Oh, build consensus really, like
right,
in other ways, like instead of in the room at ASTM, right?
right. Very often you've got an hour, 30 minutes. Everyone's looking at you like, who's this person who just showed up and is, yeah. So, you can pave the way by starting to ask some of those questions and getting the thought rolling. I've even heard people say, again, the intention is never for like people to build a coalition. I use that tongue in cheek, all right, and then to like strong arm their way into making changes. Okay. However, it is helpful anytime you need a group of people to think about something and then to make a decision that's different than what it is today, because you have to think about all the unintended consequences of changes. We've all that worked in a laboratory, we've read a test method and we're like, is this really the way it should be? Like, how did they arrive at this procedure, So give these people an opportunity to think about this new way of doing something. Do their research, right? When we're talking statistics, for example, like let them go and do the research, look at the history, so that now when you have that conversation in the room, people are primed for that. And that's advice, I think, way outside of ASTM, right? That should go for any meeting that you have at work. You're having a conversation with your wife about, whatever, right? Like let's build an opportunity
Communication
for, yeah,
skills,
yeah,
persuasion, like all that stuff matters, and that's where it can be easy to think like, oh, I'm not going to the meeting. This is where all the stuff happens. So that again, you answer the question that I want to ask is like, what's different? Like since I was there last time, knowing that the pandemic has happened since then. And what was interesting to me is like a couple other spaces, pharma and critical power experience the same things where all of a sudden the place we used to all go to talk about the stuff, we can't go there. We don't necessarily have the online system set up to
Mhm.
have successful conversations. How has ASTM, fared in your opinion in terms of like creating an online conversation?
Yeah. So standard caveat, right? This is just my perspective, right? I'm just looking at it from one side of this topic. Um, it does at least feel like maybe COVID, at least during those few years where meetings were remote, they did occur, but progress was slow. It seemed like not as much was getting done, and I think a lot of us can appreciate that happened to a lot of our lives, right? But yeah, they hosted online meetings. The same group of people were invited and could participate. But yeah, there's technical challenges, especially if you've just never worked in an environment where you worked remotely. Um, that takes some getting used to. There are still some. I'm thinking of one committee. I think it's cannabis D37. I think they still do a hybrid meeting. I think all or part of their meeting you can dial in remotely. And when you have half the room there and you got half the room away, there's some oddities that happen. It's like mics are off and then the room's like getting held up because someone's dog is barking on the phone, and then someone in the room is like talking into the mic rather than addressing the crowd. Like, so there's some little idiosyncrasies
Yeah,
there, but
for
yeah,
sure.
ASTM's trying to facilitate that, and I think they're doing the best that they can. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the important part. Like, if you really want participation at this point, like I was happy to hear that anybody's making a post on LinkedIn about especially a method like 6299. Uh, and that's why I think like helping and making sure ASTM is even when you're at the event, making sure it's super clear that that's okay to do that, right? On the LinkedIn, like a lot of people like if they don't get express permission to challenge the thing, like they're just not going to challenge it. And and we talk about things like why this stuff has been in place for so long and people still aren't understanding it, like taking a look at things and like what kind of changes did we make that people still aren't picking up on? And have we ever considered rolling it back? Like, did we actually need to make the change? Like, we thought it was a good idea. Nobody's catching on. That's where, like, what, as I've gone to these other spaces, what's super interesting, because I like, me, I like to move fast. I like to be agile and see opportunity and go after it. And, I've met some product managers in material science that behave the same way. And it's been interesting to see how innovation works alongside standards committees and method development, right? And my most recent example is had to deal with NFPA, 110. Uh, and when they meet once every 3 years, like when you can't change things, like inside of 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and you've created this product that is safer, like more effective, like cheaper, all the good things. It's like thing that clicked for me. Also having the experience at ASTM, like people that have no choice but to abide by these organizations, and there's a lot of good reasons. Like I'm not saying get rid of all the organizations. There's a lot of reasons we need them. But what you understand is like there's no incentive to go faster than the 2 year cycle or the 3 year cycle because, and this is I've definitely seen this with ASTM. You come out with the product, it nails it. It takes you 2 years to get the method through,
Mm.
and at the end of 2 years, there's two other products just like yours now available, right?
Yeah, so it's
And
interesting.
it's a challenging piece in why a shift that was happening, and I believe it. it went like the tier three situation that we've talked about like helped with this, starting to go towards performance based, standards instead of technology based and like functionality based
Mm,
stuff, right? Was a step in the right direction, but then you like it just inherently gets gray because all these things operate differently, and it's really hard to standardize the way you'd like to get the data that you need. And so just seeing that happen in a few other spaces like helped me understand why it can be hard for some people to want to participate or think that they can have a voice when it's like, okay, over here the pace of change is every day. Like literally we're dealing with customers every day. They have new problems, and maybe I can bring it up. Am I Do I have the energy to have this conversation over the course of the next 6 months,
hmm.
right, until the next meeting? So
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, very often it's if you speak up, you now have an assignment, right? The tag you're it, right? Like
yeah,
there's a little bit of that going on, but also, right? I've seen it in the room. Someone brings up the thing, and it's like, hey, okay, great. Would you draft the language? And it's like, well, yeah, of course. Like if I care about it, of course. But then it's like, hey, look, I really don't have the bandwidth to do this. Is there anyone else in the room that kind of agrees with this and understands in principle what we're trying to do that would volunteer? And I've seen people say, yeah, yeah, no problem. I'll send a draft to you. You kind of make sure it matches what you were thinking, and then I can submit it or you can submit it. Yeah, those things happen, right? Again, that's just basic business cooperation and communication. Um, you said a few things that are interesting, right? So ISO is on a 2 year cycle, right? You had an organization you referred to as 3 year cycle. And when we say those are the cycles, that's like oftentimes the quickest things would get done. It doesn't mean they're always going to get done every
yeah,
X number, right? ASTM's every 6 months, right? I see standards being modified 2 or 3 times a year. Like, and even things can be modified in between. There's some exceptions, right? But I think the point is oh, I'm going to bring up the election, right? So in the
let's do it.
U.S. election, right? I'm not
That's the
going to pick
thing.
sides, but there's that cliche thing that you can't sit on the sideline and criticize if you didn't even participate in the election. Again, you know, one vote out of 160 million or within your state, right? Like what's it really matter? We can debate that, okay? But like your one vote inside of a room of 20 people, right? When you have an opportunity to have a discussion, that can have a huge impact, right? So this idea that like this ASTM thing happens to me, like I don't accept that, right?
Right.
Um, and if you don't have the travel budget or it's not your like primary job role, um, I would just say that like that's not a good enough excuse, right? Like you can still participate in ways. Um, so I'll just kind of say that, and I'll stop pushing in that area. Um, but then, yeah, when you show up, don't miss the meeting. You know, don't be on your. I've seen these things. Like people care about a topic, but then they're checking emails about something that can wait 30 minutes. You know, and they miss the opportunity, and then they don't know what to do. It's like, oh, did I miss the procedural opportunity to say a thing? It's like, well, get off your phone and pay attention, right?
Yeah.
Like again, take some control.
Yeah.
That would be a
Participate in the process. Like if you're gonna go, right? And especially if you've been thinking about it, like that's what the orientation's for. Like there's all the resources available to understand how to participate. And again, like Josh said, like people have been there a long time. And if you raise your hand, hey, tell me what actually to do here. Like I think this is what I want to say, and when I want to say it, like people will help you understand process because the when these do work, it's because the process is being followed, right? And you're having constructive meetings, right? And that's why, you know, I'll say for any of the younger generations out there, it definitely feels traditional, like it's been in place for a long time, and if you haven't seen it before, it can be it's the opposite of social media, basically, where everybody just says whatever they want whenever they feel like, and but there's a reason for that, and it has created some really effective standardized processes for these industries that sorely need it. Like when we're talking about quality management, quality control with volatile substances that are getting used every day, like when processes are followed, plants aren't exploding, right? When the right materials that have been checked and rechecked and all this work that has gone into these standards like has real dividends for what the world that we live in every day. So they do matter. It doesn't mean they're perfect, and that's why everybody in the organization has a voice, right? So if you choose to use it or not, right, that's on you. If
Yeah. It's,
and that's
so
where,
one.
like, no matter what level, I'll say, like, if you have to follow, if you're exposed to an ASTM method, and you either are following the process or you're checking results based on it. If something doesn't smell right, sometimes literally, like either send it, you know, that's the thing. Like everybody's accessible outside of the meetings now, like more than ever, right? Whether it's LinkedIn or, the ASTM uh, online areas, just send a message to somebody. Like let somebody know, right? Because
Yeah.
chances are somebody else might think like something's going on.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you're a member of that committee or subcommittee, you can access the roster of everyone else and including contact information, right? It is meant to be an open forum for its members. So yeah, that's a good point. I don't think people know that, right? Again, and you don't have to go and like look online. Like you can just ask the person, right? Like again, everyone's quite open and helpful. Um, so I'm going to make another point, right, about getting involved and other ways that you can get involved without showing up to the meeting. And I made the same point when we talked about GCC, right? So at ASTM, Monday and Tuesday night, sometimes Wednesday night, there are hospitality events where there's a suite, a very large suite. Usually that you can get a free beer, wine, or Coke, and some finger foods, and you can meet hundreds of people, right? And very often, like the sponsors have booths, and they're there to answer your questions. So these are instrument vendors and other people that are serving the community. And it goes to like show up to your regional octane group, right? So if your laboratory does gasoline and diesel testing, you're in the U.S. Like you have a regional octane group that is a very, very, very good opportunity to meet people within your region who have a vast amount of experience, not just about octanes, but again, procedures and making things happen. We talked about the Gulf Coast Conference. The other ones, like there's tons of area lab manager meetings. We have quite a large chapter in Houston, but there are chapters throughout the U.S. I think that's another avenue. Just look for it, right? And then I wanted to circle back and ask one thing, Chris. So you were talking about the delay in getting things done. It can you come up with maybe this new technology, this new instrument, whatever it might be, and it's 2 or 3 years before it can be used to to test against that standard. Okay, so let's talk about those scenarios, right? Like, do you have an exact example that you can think of to talk about, or would you like me to kind of share a general one?
Uh, I mean, I can share it as a general,
Okay.
thing. Uh, and when we talk about the things that go into, changing a standard or creating a new one, right? It's doing the right amount of data collection and data analysis, basically. And data collection includes everybody's running the same thing in the same way, and like we trust the data. Now we have enough of it to do proper analysis, right? And since we're consensus based, we got to send it out to enough people and they all get the same material and there's just this huge communication cycle that needs to happen. And you meet like twice a year to confirm it is happening, right? Get Make sure you have all the data, right? Make sure we're following the same processes, then ask questions, get feedback, right? So in that forum, like if I have a new product and it doesn't fit, like because and this was part of the problem that that I mentioned, when it's not performance based, it's technology based. And this was, a business strategy by a lot of the companies that were involved. That's where like you have to go in with eyes wide open. And this is why the relationships matter, understanding, you know, who's there to do what goals they have, right? I've heard it's gotten a lot better over the years. Um, but that's where the term like getting locked out of a
Yep.
of a of a of a test, right? Because it got passed through and my product doesn't meet that specification, right?
Yep.
Now it does. Now there's a process to getting that specification updated. Um, and that's where when you're innovating, there's usually a standard already in place.
Mhm.
It gets harder and harder once it's like in government standards, right? That's where pharma, FDA stuff, like can be very hard to innovate there effectively. And that's where you got to put you got to have business development skills. You got to be able to persuade people and build consensus. And, that takes time, right? And that's where when 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 you have these 2-year cycles or however long the cycle is, that you can't just make a product and then have everybody start using it because you're great at marketing, right? So in that way, it's a great um, filter on that. Just everybody can't just innovate and say their thing is great without proving it,
Yep.
right? Not only proving that it's great, but proving that the risks are minimal or all these other
Yep.
reasons that, uh, that we count on the standards for like in the first place. So it's a process, and that's where in one of those processes, I had to do it low sulfur, right? And you know, um, related to combustion, and that's where there had been a market leader for a long time. Like a long time ago, the standard was based on their product, and you know, to either create a new standard or change the current one. Like that, there's just a process you got to follow, and if that takes
Yep.
2 years, at that point, when you start that process, everybody knows what you're up to, right? At that point, so if you're the first one out there and everybody knows the problem, but they've been hesitant to solve it, now it's like, okay, game on. We're all going to solve this
Mm, mm.
together, and yeah, so that's the one, that comes to mind. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that's exactly the type of example I was going to use to start. And I want to kind of have a discussion about this because I think it may be useful for people to hear this, Chris. So yeah, very commonly, the yeah, a standard was written based on its testing this type of analytes in this type of product or group of products using this technology or technique, right? That's the classic, um, and that's generally the way they've always been, and most new standards still are. And in the past, yes, there very often was only a single source supplier. And if you could prove that you were the only single source supplier, then you could be written into the standard, and then that could effectively lock out competition. And the ASTM has helped facilitate. I don't know if I would say it's ASTM or if it's the committees have been doing better about trying to make it an open opportunity for everyone. Again, based on the performance and the specification of what it's supposed to do. So that's kind of step one. Yeah, but yeah, that's kind of the first gate you have to go through. So yeah, I remember for jet fuel testing for the Jeff Tot heater tubes, right? Single source supplier, and it got debated for 15 years. Now we talked about the risk, right? And I don't remember all of the details, but I know that another supplier was accepted, and after about 2 years, if I'm remembering correctly, they found that their heater tubes did not actually perform up to the level that was required. So over the long haul, they were finding, you know, some differences in how well they performed, and that's a huge impact, right? So again, you have to balance that risk, right, when something really is working versus, right, are we just freezing them out because they can't cross their T's the way we did, right? So there's that thing. Okay, but then it's an instrument manufacturer, right? Um, what commonly happens is it's either a brand new technology or it's a slightly different technology that's not quite the way the standard was. So you've got this brand new thing. You've been working on this for years. You've got it perfected, proof of concept. You got some initial orders lined up. Everyone's happy. It performs better than anything that's ever been there. It's like it's bulletproof. Okay, cool. Then you're ready for market. And then you show up to ASTM and you're like, okay, and this happens, right? Okay, I'm
Hmm.
ready. Put me in the standard, coach. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, you don't get to come, so you have to have done your part, right? So again, again, this is just one thing that happens, and I see it, right? Someone shows up and just doesn't even know the process, right? So what I would say to them is reach out immediately, right? The moment that you think that you've got 12 months from now, you think you're going to be on the market this thing, right? Start the process, right? Now, there's some market risk, right, of maybe the cat getting out of the bag. You've got to, but if you're not okay with the delay, you have to take some of that risk on the front side. Okay, so then you mitigate that way. All right, you start, right, the process of doing what's called the ILS, the interlaboratory study, to demonstrate the performance, the precision, right? Your repeatability, reproducibility. A lot of times, a new manufacturer will show up to ASTM. They don't even know that you have to do that, right? So again, all right, you have to take some responsibility. Not you, right? The royal you, right, has to take some responsibility of understanding. I want to. I want to be able to slap a test method on this thing, so that now it can comply with specifications, so that a lot of people want to buy it. Okay, well there are steps. Sometimes those steps can take months. Sometimes they can take years or more. So the other thing I would say is, yeah, it is yeah, I would just err on the side of starting as early as possible, understanding the field that you're playing in, and then because you've networked and you've helped people and you've served your community, there are people out there that
Yes.
want to help and serve you. Okay, so you
Right.
get to call in that favor if you've given back already. You can't just show up and then start. Actually, you can, right? I've seen people just show up cold, and it's like, wow. In fact, I'll actually say, right, don't be discouraged if you haven't done all the legwork. Show up. You've got something that makes sense. People will help you. They're highly
Right.
motivated to find the right technology for them, right? They will help you, but you can help yourself a lot before that. Okay, and then
I think as you mentioned that, like, and again, I always appreciate when I find like uh, you know, congruency or similarity between the SaaS space that I'm in and how
mm,
people talk about like, you know, the two things that come to mind is like what you just described is like a community led growth, like community related stuff where it's not hard to see that you have not been a part of this community when you come in and you don't know how anything works, right? You don't know anybody in the room. So, like, participating starts before the product exists. Like, as soon as you enter the space, if you understand that ASTM methods are something you're going to have to care about, then you start going to the meeting. You don't wait until the product's ready, like Josh says. Like, how can I participate in the community if I expect to get served by the community? Like, I don't just to get to go and just take, right? Um, and then uh, I forgot about the other thing. Um,
no worries.
but that's a
I'll
oh the personal branding
mm,
stuff, right? Like when you were describing how you participate, like before online. existed, like this was how you built personal brands, like in the space. It's always interesting for me to like be able to translate doing it on LinkedIn versus, in this space because the people that have been great at it, they go and they go show up, they participate, they share their expertise, they give talks, right? So if you want to create opportunities for yourself, right, and you have career plans or goals, like this is far and away the best way, to get those things done is by participating, and specifically at ASTM, where, I was going to address this from a marketing and sales perspective, but it applies just as much from a career perspective. Like that is the highest concentration of decision makers in fuels like that I ever, came across. So if you have if you want to create opportunity for yourself, right, and get out of the resume game and just wait for, like, that's where you go do it. You go build relationships there, and it's as simple as just raising your hand, right? You don't have to go get a PhD to be able to add value to this community, right? So those are the two things that are coming to mind. Um, and that's where, yeah, it can be like it goes both ways where some of us wish like, oh, come and do that online. That's just way easier to do that. And we talk about going to where they are when we talk about digital marketing, like, oh, the audience is on LinkedIn. It's like, well, in this case, they're in very specific spots that you
Yeah,
could go to, right? And if you choose to do that, now you're participating where they are, and now they might come, online because you're showing up. And
sure.
so it's it goes both ways for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of there's two other follow up points I want to make. Right, another one about kind of that process of getting your thing approved. Right, like find people that their incentives are aligned with yours. Right, so I'll use an example. Um, VUV is a company that has a, a technology. I won't call the technology new per se, right? But it was new in the petroleum space recently, right? To do the types of testing to test benzene and aromatics and detailed hydrocarbon analysis and yeah, you know hydrocarbon types and whatever and gasoline and diesel and other stuff, right? It had the ability, like maybe a single technology, to do hundreds of chromatography tests, right? Not the exact test method, okay, but to accomplish what the tester purported to do. And they did what I believe is a great job of finding people in the industry, laboratories that believed in their technology and the benefit that they were going to get should it get mass adoption. And these laboratories wanted to be very early on in the curve of having the technology to differentiate themselves in the market and then to go along that journey, and then they could help push things through the process, right? So I saw that work really, really well. They're one example I would mention. I just happen to like the people there too, so that's why I'll mention that.
Yeah.
So finding that you should be able to find people that have the same incentives as you. If you don't, maybe you're making the wrong thing, right? Like maybe that's
Right.
a
You're not solving the right problem,
yeah,
apparently,
yeah,
right? Because that's where when you are solving the right problem and you do the work, like no matter what space you're in, uh, it's easy to sit back and play this game. It's like, oh, I gotta wait. This is how the process goes. I gotta wait for the RFPs to come through. Like, when in reality, if you can influence decision makers at a higher level and then they start pushing for the change, shit can happen pretty fast sometimes,
yep,
right? Especially when it's like a 10-year, 20-year-old, 30-year-old problem that nobody's been able to solve and there's no good reason not to move forward. That's where you can prove a lot,
yep,
ahead of time and not be the only voice in the room making the case,
yep,
right? Again, we come back to consensus and show the value. If it's truly valuable, you know, you can get things done pretty quickly sometimes.
yep. And then the other thing I would mention is okay when it doesn't happen so quickly, right? Very often, the new technology or the different technology, right? There's different ways it can be categorized, right? It falls within the same. There's an existing test method. It matches the requirements, or there's a small change to the method, right? That doesn't fundamentally impact. And there's the committee decides on that. Okay, great. You're great. You're good. Your thing gets approved. There's not like an approval process, right? The test method, you're able to align with the test method, right? Whatever that means. Great. You can go and slap that test method on your marketing, and then people can buy your test method approved thing, right? Okay, cool. Well, maybe it requires a second procedure, like procedure D, right? It's a new technology, but it fits within the overall scope of what the method is, but it needs its own procedure. Maybe that takes 6 months. Maybe that takes 12 months. Okay. Or it needs a brand new test method. Okay, great, right? So that pre-work was you kind of need to understand like what category you're likely to fall in and start drafting the thing, right? Like draft the test method. So at least once you decide what bucket, what room you've got to go in, you can hand off the book reports and start the process. And in the meantime, right, why does this even matter, right? This is the thing that I'll just mention in closing for me. It's like, why does the test method even matter, right? Like, if it's a great technology, everyone's going to just want to use it. Well, yeah, maybe, okay. But if you're testing products that American consumers are using, they usually have to comply with the specification for most of the test methods or most of the properties. And those properties only have certain test methods that are approved to comply with specification. So it has to be tested according to that spec and that property. So if you can't, or sorry, that test method. So if you can't run that test method, then the lab might not have use for your instrument, right? Now the exception is not everything's specification related testing, right? Sometimes it's process control, sometimes it's screening, um, sometimes it's just in R&D, right? So all of these things probably wouldn't be a barrier to still sell your instrument, okay? But yeah, you open up many more doors, obviously, if you have an approved test method that ties back to the specification. And if there's a regulation involved, right, it ties back to the regulation. That's like the holy grail, obviously.
Yeah. Yep. No, and it's so easy to think, especially from the manufacturer perspective, like this is the product, it's the technology, it's the box, it does this, it's ready for market. When in reality, if it's not approved for any method and I can't use it, no matter how much I love it, like you don't have a product, right? Like the product is not completed because I cannot say I've complied with this when the auditor comes in and does their job of making sure you're complying with standards that are impacting, the general public or other people in the supply chain, right? So do the work, right? You did a lot of work to get the product done, right? And that's where product teams, marketing, sales, like the best teams, when you go and see it, like they're sending multiple people. It's not just the sales guy, it's not just the technical guy, right? People are understanding it from all angles because it impacts a lot of stakeholders and they understand, okay, let's divide and conquer a little bit. Let's make sure we have all the facts of what we need to do to actually solve this problem. It's not just come up with a cool new technology, right? It's follow process. It's create processes that can actually be followed, right? We've seen that before, and you kind of just allude to it. Like, if there's no way for me to test the thing, like, I'd love to believe you, but unfortunately, there's no way to prove, right, your thing. Maybe there will be in 10 years, right? But we're just not there yet. Uh, and that's where it can be a little bit, frustrating sometimes. But I mean, there's a reason for all this stuff being in place, and that's where if it can be proven, it can all most often outside of a standard, it's finding those customers with the problems. Hey, let's try it out in your lab, right? You get some data and the ball starts rolling, from there. Uh, and there are cases where there has never been a method, like nobody's ever figured out how to test this thing. That doesn't mean you can't add value to the market, right? but you just have to prove a little bit, like what's going on, what value you are providing, what problem you're solving, and there's work to be done. Uh, so this has been fun, man. I love these conversations. Hopefully, it was helpful for some out there. I hope we'll chat a couple more times before then. But if there's anybody thinking about going, or questions come up, just start sharing. That's why we're here. Like sharing your thoughts, sharing your feedback. You don't have to wait until you get to the meeting and then not talk to whoever you were trying to talk to, and now it goes unsaid, right? Like just get it out there. Um, and if you need help doing that, Josh is here to help. I'd be happy to chime in. And sometimes it's just pointing you in the right direction. Like, hey, this is the chair you want to talk to, right? Um, in most Like there's a reason they're in that position. They want voices to be heard. They want to facilitate conversation, right? Sometimes it makes their day. Like it can be hard to get the participation you need to actually get things done. So sometimes you're doing a huge favor by speaking up and
True.
generating conversation and questions and feedback. So
Yeah,
um,
that's a great point, Chris. And I'll just mention that. Like I recognized that many years ago. Like I'm not afraid to ask the stupid question, right? Very oftentimes I will recognize that there's a topic being discussed that other people may not truly get the nuance of. And I'll be the one that asks the dumb question so that a conversation can take place to benefit people. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, "Oh man, I'm so glad you asked that because I didn't even know how to ask the question." And I'm like, "Yeah, no problem." They're like, "So you didn't understand either?" I'm like, "No, no, I didn't either." So it's like, I mean, I understood, but and I'll do that like very often, like when Alex is giving a training class. That's a really good example of where I'll ask them dumb questions, and people are like, "Oh man, thank
yeah,
you so much."
yeah.
Hey, real
Oh, the
quick,
curse.
one other cool thing about ASTM, and this is really underrated, is well the fact that this one's at Disneyland, right? Like a lot of people I know are bringing their family. There's like group discount rates, by the way, if you want to ask me for that information. But they've got this really cool thing like this, like bring your spouse, right? They've got a
Yeah.
spouses club, and I think it's over 50 people now, and
Wow.
like you're not going to be an outsider. I guarantee that, right? Day one, you will feel included, and it's 80%, 90% women, but there are male spouses as well. And it's a really good co-ed group, and every day they have like a breakfast that's free, and they have a planned excursion. You can join or not join. You can tap out early if you want, but like so many people have described just how awesome that's been for their spouse. And it's maybe not a bad idea for your spouse to rub shoulders with important people too, right? For what it's worth.
Yeah. No, it can be a little help. Like this is what I do. I do actually know these people that are important. Here's the proof, right? Like that. Sometimes a little recognition, goes a long way. But yeah, and the little work trip that provides a little fun usually doesn't hurt things. But yeah, that's a good point. Again, ASTM does a good job of trying to be inclusive and not, you know, make it seem like you can't join or you gotta you know, be a certain way to be able to participate, right? It is open. They do try it. They understand, uh, what's in play, and to get the participation, you got to be, open and accommodating, and that's always been it's always been easy. Like if you decide to go and everybody there is super helpful to help you get where you need to go.
Agreed.
Um, so if you're thinking about it, yeah, check it out. And uh, I hope it was helpful today. If you got questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And until next time, I hope everybody has a great rest of the week.
All right.
Thanks,
You
Josh.
guys take care. Thanks, Chris.